sell this house, if my seller needs to close on this house by the end of the month, as a seller, do we have much leverage in that way? Not a lot, right? If you have a seller that's flexible on their timing, then you've got some more leverage. If you're a buyer and you know that the seller of the home that they're trying to buy has to be out by the end of the month, can you use that? I don't want to say use that against them, but use that to make a win-win. And what oftentimes can you do as representing a buyer when you know that the seller's got to be out by the end of the month or by a specific time? Yeah, if you're representing a buyer and they say, yeah, we've just absolutely got to move within 2 weeks, what might you be able to do? What's that? Okay. Okay, yeah. If you can meet the seller's needs, that would be huge. Oftentimes, if you can, if that's more important to them, you could probably get a little bit better price on it, right? Or you could ask for more seller paid concessions, things like that, because you know a little bit more about their situation. So providing insight on where you and your clients have leverage. In the situation that I shared with the angry lady, what was our leverage? Chris already mentioned it. Yeah, time. That was our leverage at that point. Sometimes the leverage can be money. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's a certain place. Like if a seller knows that the buyer has looked for years and years for a property and this is the absolute perfect home for them, what could they possibly do? Yeah, they could charge probably a little bit more, right? So these are things that if you find out about the other side, you can use to your advantage. What does it also say about you representing your client if you know that they have something like that that could harm them in a negotiation? Absolutely do not divulge it, right? You've got to keep that close to your chest. That's why in most cases, even if your seller has to move out by the end of the month type of situation, maybe 2 weeks is a little different, but if they've got to be out by 30 days, I wouldn't even put it on the listing at all. Because what do you think as a buyer or as an agent, when you see in the listing description, seller's motivated? What does that tell you? Yes, yeah. You can put in an offer lower than what we want. We might accept it. We probably will, right? So you got to be careful with your language and what information you're sharing to the other side that could potentially harm your clients. That is part of your fiduciary duties, right? If you remember back from real estate school. Yeah, exactly. For some of us, it's a little longer than that. But that's part of your fiduciary duties is to keep confidentiality. That's one of them, right? Keep the things that could potentially harm them in a negotiation confidential. There may be a time where it's okay to share, my sellers have to be out by this date. When might that be a situation where you could share that information? Okay, when you get an offer, yeah, they may ask. I would say that the only times where you should is if your seller agrees to that, because that is a piece of information that could potentially harm you. So you've got to get that permission from your sellers to share that and kind of let them know the risks and say, hey, we can tell them that we need to be up by a certain date. Most of the time, if it's like a couple days, like if it's a month out and you get an offer and they ask you, what would be the better, is there a preferred settlement deadline? Kind of the general response that you could give is, well, they would love to move out by this date, but it's not absolutely necessary. That to me says, yeah, they like that. That might help your offer get accepted, but also we're flexible. So don't think you can just lower the price to get us to move out by that day because it's not that important. Even if it is, I would usually kind of phrase it that way to make sure that you're not harming your client, right? Then if they send you an offer that's not exactly what you want, you might have to change that a little bit. That's okay. But yeah, keep in mind who you're representing and who you're negotiating for, right? Okay, you want to set clear expectations for them and make sure that they know what is going on in the market, what's likely to happen. Again, my clients that went in on that home, like they had those expectations that if they found a house that they liked, they had to act quickly, which was true at the time. It's still true to an extent, maybe not within 2 hours type true, but it is still true that they have to act quickly. So you've got to kind of set those expectations so that they're aware. Asking the right questions can allow you to get to know your client and their goals, to help them figure out what is most important to them. The biggest mistake that a lot of salespeople make in any industry is just assuming that the same reasons you want to sell this house or buy this house is the same reasons that the last 50 people wanted to, right? Is that always true? No, there may be parts of it that's true, but again, you only know that if you ask them the right questions. So for them, this is their first time going through this, or this experience is unique to them. And so they've got to be the ones to voice what's important to them. In my opinion, it's okay to assume that their motivations and what their goals are, only to the extent of asking them questions about that. What I mean by that is, as a seller, if I'm representing a seller, it's okay for me to assume that they want the highest amount that they possibly can get, in order for me to ask them questions about that and say, how important is price to you? You know, what would you do with the money if you were able to get the highest price? How would you feel if you found out later that somebody else would have offered more for your home and you accepted a different offer? Right? I'm kind of trying to figure out how important is the price to them? How important is price compared to definitely wanting to move? I have a client right now who I'm representing the sale of their home and the purchase of their next home. They care so much more about buying this home than they do about getting top dollar for their home. They still want as much as they can, but it matters to them more to move out by the right time so that they can move into the next home. That's what they want. So they're willing to negotiate a little bit on the price in order to make the deadlines match up, right? I only can know that if I'm asking the questions. Maybe to somebody, they're like, yeah, we're under contract on this home. We love it, but also I really want to get this amount for my home. And if I can't, I'm willing to cancel that home and find another home, right? That might be them. So we don't know until we start asking these questions. But it also helps you learn what will make it a win-win. Another example of what most people are of assuming is, like, I had a client a few years ago that wanted to, this is kind of weird, but he wanted to have a commute of a minimum of 45 minutes. That's the opposite of most people, right? Believe it or not, he grew up in Richfield, so close to I guess sort of close to Mount Pleasant area. But the way he grew up and the way his dad worked in South Utah County, which, if I'm not mistaken, is like an hour and a half drive or so, something like that. And that's how his dad grew up, and he loved it. He was able to listen to his audio stuff, and he was like, I've always wanted to do that. He's like, yeah, too much more than 45 minutes is probably too far, but like 45 minutes is just ideal. So he can listen to his stuff and have that peaceful drive home and to work every day. Kind of unique, right? How did I find that out? By asking him what matters to them. When his wife. Well, they now live in Goshen, and he works in American Fork. So it was right at about that 45-minute mark. But they've got like a ranch, and his wife loves to be out in the ranch. So anyway, it works for them. Exactly. But the point is, you don't always know. So it's okay to assume a little bit, only to the extent of asking them questions to figure it out. But definitely don't assume that, hey, I found this home that's way better and it's way closer to your job, because maybe he doesn't want that. Right? And then the listening part, they feel like you're not listening to them because that's not what they wanted. So anyway, helps you create a win-win. So it helps you know where are the parts that they're willing to negotiate on, and what are the parts that they do not want to negotiate on, so that you can kind of wiggle with some of these other ones and maybe hopefully help the other side agree with you while still maintaining the absolute necessities of your client. Okay. Open-ended versus closed-ended questions. Which is better? Another trick question for you.
Open-ended always.
Aha. I would say that both of them are good, but they both have their own purpose. And most of the time you ask a closed-ended question, meaning it has a yes or no answer, should be followed up with an open-ended question. So a simple example would be, do you want a commute of 30 minutes or less? And they say yes. What would most people do? Move on to something else. What would a wise agent that's really trying to figure out their motivations do? They'd ask a follow-up question about, okay, tell me more about that. Why is that important to you? Right? Something like that. What would it mean if you couldn't find a house that has a short commute? What areas of your life would that affect you? And what if you did find a home within 15 minutes of your job? How would that change your life? You know, how would that affect your ability to spend more time with your family? You know, whatever your questions are, but these are, yeah, yes or no answers, questions have a place, but definitely, to Renell's point, the open-ended questions is going to give you a lot more information most of the time. Okay. All right, what and why questions? These are good. What would happen if you could make this a positive thing, and you could also make this a negative thing? We talked about this more in depth in spin selling. Why is it important to you? Helps you gain more information and gain more insights, right? You guys heard of the term 3 levels deep? So a lot of people feel that way when you ask a question. Let's say they have they mention that they want a yard or a fence around the yard for the home that they're going to buy. And so you can ask them questions like, why is that important to you? And they may say, well, because I have a dog and, you know, I don't want to take him on a walk to go to the bathroom every day multiple times. It would, and then tell them, okay, why is that important to you? Kind of dig deeper, like ask multiple questions to kind of get a whole picture of why they want a fence. It's not just because they want the fence. It's for other reasons, right? So we got to dig deeper. You guys have seen the analogy of the iceberg. A lot of times that first initial response that they have is just the tip of the iceberg, but there's really underlying motivations and reasons behind why they said that may or may not make sense to you until you continue to ask a little bit deeper. Yes. Okay. I love that you said that, because my wife is actually graduating this month in family science at UVU she wants to become a therapist. And I've kind of mentioned that a couple of times, because spin selling to me is so similar to the types of questions that they'll ask in therapy. And that's okay. We are not therapists, but we do ask a lot of questions to really get them talking about a lot of things. And here's the thing, I love that about this job, because for me, I love to work with friends and family, and it's allowed me to be a more intimate part of their lives, right? Because I'm able to ask those types of questions and be involved with them in that way. So it's strengthened so many of my relationships. It's hurt a few, but more often than not, it strengthens the relationship if we can do our jobs right. So a lot of fun. All right, we're going to skip this. Okay, now we're going to talk about presenting. Now, when I talk about presenting, this could be when you have a client that wants to make an offer on a home. What should you absolutely always, always, always do when you have a client that wants to make an offer on a home? First thing you should do. Any guesses? Okay, you should have a buyer's agent agreement in place. That is true. Not the one I'm looking for. That's okay. How do you know what's important to the seller?
Ask them.
And how do we ask them? Yes. So one thing to write down, if you do not have this a habit already, is when your client wants to make an offer on a home, 100% of the time you should call the listing agent and find out what is important to the seller. Why would that matter? Exactly, it can use as leverage. I found a couple of reasons why that can help. Number one, not that we're trying to get people to do things they shouldn't be doing, but if you ask certain questions, oftentimes you will get information you can use to your advantage in negotiation. You may find that they tell you that they need to be out by a certain day. You may find that they may be willing to accept a price that's a little bit lower. You may find out certain information that you could use to your advantage. The other reason is, even if they don't divulge things they shouldn't, they may tell you things that you can put in your offer to kind of tailor that offer to the seller's needs. That way, if they get an offer that's higher, but it has terms they don't like, but your terms are exactly what they like, more often than not, they'll ask you to maybe raise your price, but go with you, as opposed to go to the other client and have them change 5 different terms, right? So in other words, when you have a client that wants to make an offer, call the listing agent and ask them questions about how you can, how your offer can best stand out. There's a lot of different questions you can ask. You can simply ask them, one of the best questions is, what would a perfect offer look like for your client? And let them tell you. Most of the time they're going to mention price, but they'll mention some other things too. They'll say, you know, they really don't want to give away the fridge. Okay, we can work with that. They may say that that there are certain deadlines that they want. They may say that they really want higher earnest money. They may say they're not willing to pay a home inspect or a home warranty. They could say a ton of different things. How often would you guys, okay, well, first I'll ask this. How often should that call take place? When a buyer's agent has an offer that their client wants to make on a seller's property, how often should that buyer's agent call that agent?
Whenever it's needed.
Yeah, every single time. So, but having done many listings, how often would you guess I get a call from the buyer's agent asking that question, saying, hey, I have a client that's interested in an offer and making an offer. What's important to your seller? How often would you guess that happens? Not very often. I would say less than 25% of the time. Should be 100% of the time if agents are doing their job right. Because you don't know. You've got to know what matters to the seller. Again, you could assume that the only thing they care about is price, so I'm going to offer a higher price, but that's not always true. And even if that is true, what are the other terms that if there's another offer that matches that same price, what are the other terms that matter to them? So make this a part of your habit to call the listing agent every time your buyer wants to make an offer on a property to see what their motivations are, find out what information you can get. What can a listing agent tell you? If you ask them, how many offers do you have on the table? Are they obligated to give you that answer? They're not. It depends on what.
What the people that they're working for have asked them not to disclose, and
Exactly.
also they're legally
Yep.
bound to.
Exactly. Renelle and Chris hit the nail on the head. You have to have this conversation with your sellers beforehand. So as part of your listing presentation, I would strongly recommend that you talk about this. Say, when I do receive an offer and they ask questions like, how many offers do you have on the table? What would you like me to say? So that you can get their permission on how you want to go about handling that. Now you can give your advice because this is part of our job, right? They may say, well, I don't know, what do you think I should say? Then you can talk about the pros and cons of saying, well, if we say that we have 5 different offers, it could scare some buyers away, or it may motivate them to be stronger, right? It just kind of depends. But yeah, ultimately, whatever the seller allows you to say is what you can say. So when I'm a buyer's agent and I have a buyer wanting to purchase a property and I make that call, I don't know if the seller has given them permission to say all the things that they are going to say. Sometimes they'll give me no information because the seller's asked them not to. That's fine, but I'm always going to ask because more often than not, I'm going to get something that I can use. So I can ask about the other offers. I can ask what the other offers look like, right? Again, you may get rejected on that, and they may say, no, I can't tell you that. That's fine. But what if they did give you that answer? Could that be helpful for you? Totally could. Yeah, it does happen. So ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, but also don't be offended if they say no. Say, okay, no problem. What can you tell me? Right. Now I'm going to flip it to the other side. Let's say we're representing a seller. This happened to me about a year ago. It's kind of funny. I had a client selling their house. We listed it for $350,000. It was a tiny house, and we get an offer from a buyer. And before we get an offer, we have a client that's interested. Buyer's agent texts me and asks me what other offers I have on the property. And at that time, in reality, we had no other offers. So can I lie to him and go ahead and tell him that we have 6? No, it's unethical, right? We have a code of ethics for a reason. I can't just say that. I did say we've had a lot of interest. What does that mean? Could be anything, right? Doesn't really matter. But we did have a lot of showings. So there's interest in showings at least. So I texted him back and said, well, we've had quite a few showings, or we've had quite a bit of interest, is what I told him. And he said something along the lines of, I've been doing this job for 30 years and I've never had anybody tell me that they can't tell me how many offers you have on the table. Because, sorry, to back up a little bit, my text to him back when he asked how many offers are on the table, I basically said the sellers have not authorized me to disclose that, but what I can say is that we've had a lot of interest. That's what I told him, right? Because we had no offers, I'm not going to tell him that we don't have any offers because I feel like that was going to hurt his position, but I also don't want to lie to him and say that we have multiple. So I kind of politically answered his question, right? Dodged it a little bit. But then he sent me that text saying that, well, guess what? Do you think I got a little bit shy and was like, okay, fine, I'll tell you? No, I did not. Stuck to our guns and said, sorry, like that's what they've allowed me to say. Whether or not his 30 years experience has ever had that or not, I don't know. Doesn't matter. But I know that I was doing the right thing in that moment. Well, guess what happened? We had listed the home for as I said, $350. He sends in his offer for $385. Do you think that would have happened if he knew that there were no other offers on the table? Absolutely not. There's no way. He probably would have offered $340. That would have been $45,000 difference for my sellers. Is that a big deal? Yeah, I didn't care about his 30 years. So, but my point is, that is information that absolutely made a difference because I withheld it, that my sellers got that much more money for them. They may or may not know that. And I had a conversation with them about how it was handled and everything, and they appreciated it. But that simple little withholding information in my mind saved us at least $35,000 for my sellers. It's pretty cool, right? So that's the power of withholding information and keeping things a little bit vague, because you want to make sure that they offer the best that they can, right? And they ended up closing and everything was worked out great. So yeah, two sides to that coin. If you have information that you don't want the other party to say to know that can harm you, do not say it. On the other side, if you can find out information that can help you, you want to at least ask, but don't be offended and call them a jerk and say that in 30 years this has never happened, because doing your job right? So, yeah, we're investigators, we're psychologists. I mean, we do a lot of things as realtors, right? Exactly. Okay, so here's some best practices. The top one: call the other agent when you have an offer to make on the property. Find out what you can do, because your buyer may be like, I don't really care if they include the fridge. It'd be nice if they did, but I also wouldn't mind getting a new one. Okay, then if that matters to the seller, why not just tailor the offer to what they want so that your buyer can get the things that are more important to them? Pay attention to nonverbal cues like pauses and voice qualities. Keep quiet once you present an offer. It's probably the hardest part, is when you have information or you're wanting information for somebody, is to just tell them what it is and then stop. A big mistake a lot of people make is they'll tell them what it is and then they'll explain more and they'll explain more and they'll explain more. And what's the risk of continuing to talk like that? Yeah, you may give some stuff away that you probably shouldn't. Some stuff away that probably. So if you notice on the other side, they just keep talking, I would keep them on the phone, keep talking to them, see what information they'll give you, right? Listen carefully. That's the other key to it, though, is you have to listen carefully to what they're saying, to what is important to them. Stay calm and relaxed. Focus on the customer's needs. Give your offer the best chance. Well, I think doing these things does give you the offer the best chance, right? Okay. Simple essential steps. So acknowledge and affirm common ground. Ask what and how questions. Know that positioning is a process, and know when to walk away. So I like the first one: acknowledge and affirm common ground. One negotiating tactic is to help them see that you are willing to be flexible in some ways. So if you have a client that asks certain things and every single one of them is a no, 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 does your client feel like they're willing to work with you? Not at all, right? So when you're helping your sellers or your buyers and the other party gives you a counteroffer or sends you some request, I would say, to the best of your ability, to where you feel comfortable or where your client feels comfortable, to try and match it the best that you can, so that both sides can feel like both sides are willing to help out and keep the deal moving forward. But of course, when it matters to them a lot, then it's okay to stick to your ground a little bit and know, as the last one says, when to walk away. If they're asking you something that you just do not feel comfortable with, it's okay. Just say no. And if they walk away, they walk away, but you're not going to put yourself in a position to where you have to sell a home in a way that does not benefit you, right? So, trying to think of a recent example I've had with that, but anyway, we'll keep going. Okay, any more ahas? Yeah, let me go back. I have one with the know when to walk away. One story that was back actually in my door-to-door days. I was taught, if you guys have ever had Dish Network or DirecTV, what happens after 2 years to the price?
Goes up.
It skyrockets, right? Which is why I like my job, because all I had to do is find people that were paying, that were with a service for more than 2 years, and I know that I could beat them on price, could beat them on all this other stuff. But one of the tactics that I learned that happens a lot is, if you were to call in to one of those companies and threaten to leave and say, hey, I got this flyer, this is a much better price, I think I'm going to go for that. One of the things that I did for clients all the time was I would make that call to the company, and they would say, okay, well, I'm sorry to see you go, but I would say, well, we're going to schedule it to be canceled in a week from now so I can get that other one set up. And then we'd hang up on the phone. And guess what happened every single time the next day? Guess who called that client and said, hey, I magically found this amazing price. So they didn't have to switch companies, and they got a much better deal, right? So knowing to walk away from that phone call and just being like, this is what we're doing, and then they come back to you afterwards. I think that can apply to real estate sometimes, to where silence, be comfortable with silence, be okay with not responding quickly. There's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where sometimes I'm a seller's agent and I'll get a buyer that sends in an offer, and within a few hours they ask, hey, have you talked about the offer yet? And I said, no, we're going to talk tonight. And then at 6 o'clock, hey, have you talked to the sellers about that offer yet? Like, they reach out way too much. But then also there's some where they send in an offer a day, 2 days go past the deadline of that offer, and they still haven't reached out. I feel like that's also like, well, are they really interested? Right? So there's the annoying side where you're just being a nuisance. And as an agent, I'm feeling like this is not going to be a fun transaction if we end up going with you, because you're like too nervous or too scared about the process, right? You're too nervous about it. Maybe something's going to fall through. And then there's the other side where you're not communicating at all. And I feel like that's a problem too. So kind of a balance. But I found that when I send in an offer, it's totally fine to ask them, do you have a specific time frame where the sellers may be making a decision? Wait to hear their response. And once they tell you that response, I would say, if they say Monday night, then I would say Tuesday morning, maybe reach out to them and say, if you haven't heard anything yet, and just be like, hey, just wanted to let you know my clients are still super interested. Would love to hear from you. Did you have a chance to talk about it last night? Because I think that's kind of that balance of not being too annoying, but also not to completely dropping off and being like, I don't care. Right. One of the hard things about this is that last part about not caring about the outcome. Obviously, we care when we're negotiating, we do care about the outcome, right? But we have to be emotionally unattached. When I say that, what does that mean to you? Emotionally unattached to the outcome.
You have to not worry about it and just realize that there are more houses, and
Yeah.
just help your client feel comfortable that maybe can feel.
Yeah, we can't control everything. There always is another home. Here's the thing, there is no perfect home out there. Even if you build a custom home and you design it yourself and you do everything, the day that you move in and you find another home that's brand new and today's trends have changed and style and different ideas change, your home is no longer perfect, right? Like, there is no perfect home. And so it's good to be aware of that, because it's good to remember that as you're going out with your clients, if they find a home that seems perfect and for whatever reason isn't going to work out, maybe they don't accept your offer, keep that emotional positivity and, hey, there's always another home, we'll find one. So keep that up. But yeah, not being attached to the outcome can help you from getting emotional about the process. Because when you're emotional in a negotiation, I would say the other party's winning, right? And we're trying to make a win-win here. We're not trying to make a win-lose. So there's two things that kind of hurt you a lot in negotiation, and that is being emotional about it. So if you're emotionally responsive to this thing, like that example that I shared where she was just visibly upset, text me angry stuff, to me, that shows, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a lack of or lack of confidence, right? Which means that I may have more wiggle room than I thought. Right? I may be able to, like she seems a little more desperate, right? So being emotional can really hurt you. And the other thing that can really hurt you is not listening. Generally, like kind of a general rule of thumb is which party is usually winning in a negotiation? The one that talks more or the one that talks less? Yeah. For that same reason that we talked about a minute ago, that oftentimes if you get them talking and they start to share things that you can use to your advantage. But if you're not talking, kind of like what I said, we have a lot of interest and kept it quiet, I believe we won in that negotiation, right? Like they sent in an offer much higher than what we anticipated. It was great. All right, couple tips. Be professional. Okay, keep your goal in mind. And again, when I say your goal, whose goal are we actually talking about? Your client's goal, right? Keep their priorities in mind. Pay attention to your communication and tone with anyone involved in the transaction. You will run into these people again, right? Although there are a lot of agents in Utah County, you are going to run into them multiple times, many of them, right? There have been times where certain agents that I've worked with in the past or had bad experiences with, when I'm representing a seller and their client sends in an offer, do you think I mentioned that to the seller? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not with enthusiasm. I do bring it up, but I do try to keep that emotional plainness. And I don't want to just talk bad about people either. Because I don't want, like, maybe their client's offer is the best. But if I say but that is worth knowing. A lot of times they appreciate knowing that, like, hey, I just want you to know I have worked with this client, with this agent before, and it was not a positive experience for my clients. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about the different offers, right? So you want to be that agent that when you send in an offer, they're like, oh, I want to work with Alicia again. That last transaction we did was awesome. Like, she was a great agent. She helped her client. She wasn't rude to me. Like, it went really well. So you want to be that agent where people see your name and be like, yes, I would love to do that. Continually refer to your client's motivation when speaking to them. This is kind of a reminder, and it does two things. When you bring up those notes you wrote down in your initial consultation of what their priorities are, when you bring those up, do you think those ever change as your clients start going through different homes? That happens a lot, where they thought they knew what they wanted, and then they started going to see different homes that had that or that didn't have that, and they realize, you know what, that's actually not that important to me. So in that initial conversation, I do tell them, I say, I tell them exactly that. Say, it sounds like what I've heard from you is that your motivation, your absolute number one priority is X, and then you want Y and you want Z. And as we go about seeing different homes, those are likely to change, because they are. And as that happens, just keep me in the loop. Just let me know that, hey, you know what? I actually have learned that I don't really care for a mountain view as much as I wanted, or I don't really want a home on the lake as much as I wanted. I would much rather have a 3-car garage than have a home on the lake. So that's my priority. I've kind of shifted my preferences. So that's totally fine, and let them know that's probably going to happen. And that's why this is not a one-time conversation, and then you've got your notes and you always go with that. You want to kind of refer to that often so that you can check in with them and see if that's changed. Okay, the fifth one we've talked about a lot. Don't reveal too much. Listen more than talk. Keep your client's motivation close to your chest. So you know what they really, really want, but that piece that they really, really want, you don't necessarily give to the other side. Sometimes, right? Because if you're in a multiple offer situation and you're the seller's agent and say their motivation is price, all they care about is a higher price, I think that's okay to share with them, because then maybe if they can match that, then great. But again, if their motivation is they want to move out by a certain day and that can hurt you, that's the one you want to keep close to your chest. So just kind of think through that lens. If I was on the other side and I heard that they had this, how would I interpret that? If I heard that the seller was motivated, to me, I hear seller's willing to accept a lower offer, right? That can hurt. So if that's the case, okay, I don't want to say that. I want to say something different. And then there it is. Don't be attached to the outcome. There's always another house. There's always going to be another offer, right? There's always going to be other opportunities that the way things work out. So just have that urgency and remind them of their motivation, but don't get emotional about it. They may get emotional. That's pretty common. But you as the agent, that's one of the things that we take out of the transaction is the emotion. Okay, I think that's all the slides.
So question.
Yeah.
Any tips for women are emotional? How do we take the emotions out of it?
Nope, no tips. I don't know. Don't know how to deal with that. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah,
Maybe just take some cool off time or something, because
yeah,
I know with this, when I moved in October and I sold my house in Eagle Mountain and bought an American Fork, and my really good friend was my realtor and completely screwed me over,
right.
and I was very
Oh,
emotional.
yeah, I'm sure.
And she was very emotional,
Yeah.
and it was a mess,
Yeah.
So I mean, how do you
Yeah. So as the agent, it is important to keep calm as much as possible, because when you get emotional, it actually adds fuel to the fire and they get more emotional because of that. If you can just keep that calm demeanor and while at the same time validating them, because you don't want to just tell them this happens, this is true for any relationship, right? Like you don't want to just tell them you're insane for thinking that, like, how dare you get emotional about this? No, we just keep it calm and say, hey, I understand how you feel. That is a really big deal. I'm sorry that happened. Here's what I'll do to help fix it. Or here's what I recommend. Or in some situations, it's more on just leaning on your confidence. Maybe you don't have that as much built up right now, but lean on, if you're on a team or even just being a part of Keller Williams, like we are the largest real estate company in the world. Maybe lean on that a little bit and just say, hey, with our experience and with so-and-so that I talked to or whatever, we've seen this before, and kind of help give them that confidence that you know what you're doing, things are going to work out, right?
so kind of maybe just validate their feelings and then just say, hey, don't worry, I've got you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. So definitely want to validate them, but give them the confidence that that's why they hired you, is to help keep track of what their motivations are, and say, hey, I understand this is emotional. I understand this it's a really big deal. Sometimes it goes like this, but if you remember, this is what you told me was important to you, X, Y, and Z. And so because of that, I'm going to make sure that we definitely take care of you in that way. It's kind of reminding them of why you're there. I want to talk about repair negotiations for a minute, if that's okay. You guys have a few minutes to talk about that? I think that's one of the other parts of the negotiation that can often be kind of fear-inducing. So there's the negotiation up front to get your offer accepted. There's two other negotiations that generally could happen throughout. One of them is repairs after due diligence. What's the other one that might happen? Okay, on the financing deadline appraisal, what sometimes happens that we may have to negotiate something again. Could be time. It has to do with financing. When you get a loan, who do they send out to the property to evaluate it? The appraiser, right? Sometimes the appraisal comes in low and you have to renegotiate something. So we're going to talk about those two pieces, and then I think we'll be done. That's okay with you guys. So say you're under contract, and on a buyer's end, what does the market affect your ability as a buyer to potentially ask for repairs? Totally does, right? Going back to that situation 2 years ago, when we were in the height of the market, what do you feel like it was very common for sellers to do any repairs? Hardly at all, right? So if you're representing a seller and you know that that's what's going on, and you have a buyer ask you to do 10 different things, what could you do? you know when to walk away, right? This happened to me. It was actually a situation where the home was only 3 years old, so I don't know what they were talking about, but their inspector went in and said that the furnace needs to be replaced. And it was going to be $5,000. So they want the sellers to pay $5,000. Well, we had 5 other offers. So what did we simply say? Sorry, that's not something that we feel like we need to do. And we have multiple other offers, so sellers are willing to go that route if that's more comfortable for your buyer. And lo and behold, they said, okay, fine. And they went forward with it anyway, and we closed. So knowing the situation and knowing the leverage, knowing the market helped with that negotiation, because that was our leverage. Let's say if we were in an opposite market where the sellers are desperate to find somebody to buy the home, there are no buyers out there at all, and finally we get this offer. Do you think they maybe lean a little more towards, okay, fine, we'll give you the 5,000? Probably, depending on the motivation, but yeah, that's probably more likely to happen than the other market. So kind of knowing the market is the biggest dictator. Well, I wouldn't say just the market, but I would say the amount of offers and the amount of interest you had on the home is probably the biggest dictator in how many repairs are agreed upon. Now, that's not always true. I had a home that I sold that the buyers asked for 30, and I'm not joking, he sent me an email with 30 different items they wanted the seller to repair before moving out in 3 weeks. How do you think most people would respond to that? Heck no. Do you think they'll do anything on there? From my experience, they'll probably do a handful of things, but which ones are they going to do?
Easy ones.
Easiest ones and the cheapest ones. Do you think those are the ones that were the most important to the buyer anyway? No. So I don't think it's smart for that reason to send in a giant list of anything. To my surprise, my sellers were so motivated and just wanted to move that they actually accepted 15 of those items, which was way more than I thought they would.
Wow.
But again, I didn't answer for them. I let them make that choice. I let them know their position, and they were like, yeah, it's fine. Those are some things I wanted to do anyway. He was a handyman, so like it wasn't a big deal for him. But yeah, the market kind of can help indicate that. But if as a buyer, I strongly recommend not sending in a giant list. Now, here's one tip that I think can help a lot. What is an inspector's job in a nutshell? A home inspector, when they go into a home?
To look for any problems.
Yeah. Do you think they're going to find any problems?
Yeah.
They're very good at their jobs. That's what they do. They find all the problems, right? So when they go with your buyer through a property, they're going to point out every single flaw that they found. Now, to some buyers, that may be a scary thing, and they may feel like they want to walk away. My very first, again, I learned a lot in my first year as a real estate agent. My very first client, I did not prepare her before the home inspection. This was her first home. She goes in with the home inspector, and I actually was present at the time, going through the house with them. And based on what I had seen up to that point, I felt like, okay, yeah, this home is good. Like, yeah, there's some cosmetic things, but there's nothing big. Guess how my client felt? After the home inspector left, she's like, do you think I should even buy this house anymore with all those problems? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, there was nothing big, you know? So I had not prepared her before the home inspection. So one thing that I recommend doing for your clients is to say, hey, home inspector's job is to find the problems. They're very good at their job. They're going to find problems. They're going to document all of that. But what I'm here to help you with is to help you determine if there's anything that affects the home's value. That's what we want to address. Or if there's anything safety related, or if there's anything that's just broken that needs to be fixed. But those big ticket items, those are the things that we're really looking for. An example of, there's usually mainly 5 different things, and you guys can write these ones down, but there's usually 5 different things I'll tell my clients that I'm looking for in the home inspection. He's going to find a bunch of cosmetic stuff that could be fixed or could not be. But the things that I think are a big deal are the foundation. If there's issues with the foundation, that's an extremely costly repair. I had one where my buyer was under contract for a property. The inspector found out that this home was built in the 70s, and for a short time, they were doing this really fun thing, doing a wooden foundation. And he found that a bunch of the wood had totally rotted. And in order to replace the foundation, it would cost him like $100 grand. So my clients walked away. It's pretty valuable to know, right? So that's one of the things we're looking for. Yeah, it was just in Provo. That was weird. Never seen it again. So that's probably Didn't
Provo
happen very
would do
often.
that.
But what's that?
Provo
Yeah.
would do that.
Provo's weird. No, it's fun. So foundation is one. Electrical is another big one that could potentially be a big one. The structure of the home. So like if the walls or if the home is slanted or if there's just some structural problem with it. The roof, kind of a big ticket item that needs to be looked at. And the plumbing, the other one that will probably be costly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So those are the things that we're really looking for. Is there something that affects the home value? Because if there's a big problem with any one of those things, that significantly can affect the home value.
Foundation, plumbing.
Foundation, plumbing, electrical, structure, and roof. And so what I tell my clients is that those are the things we'll be looking for. I will let you know if there's something significant here, we can talk about it, or if there's anything concerning to you. But just think of the rest of the items that he found as kind of like a honey-do list, right, of things that you can do on your home later on. But you know, a doorknob that doesn't work is not going to affect the home value, right? So that's not necessarily something that you should be asking for normally. Yeah, so I would say after the home inspection, talk with your clients, review the home inspection, say, is there anything of concern to you? Talk to them about that. Again, if it's a safety thing, like sometimes there's smoke alarms that don't work at all. That's a safety thing. That might be something that you might want to have addressed. If the dishwasher is broken, well, that's something that you expect would be working. So that might be something you could address. So you can just kind of talk about it. But again, depending on the situation, if you knew there were multiple offers, your leverage is probably a little lower. So you're gonna have to keep that list a little tighter. If the home's been on the market for 6 months, you're the only offer, you got $20,000 off the list price, you may be able to ask for a little more. So you just kind of know the playing field a little bit. But then once they do that, what I'd recommend is letting the sellers know and say, hey, your home is awesome, kind of give them that compliment. My clients still love the home. There are a couple of things of concern to them that they would like to address. Talk to your client to see if they would rather have the seller fix it, if they would rather have the seller give them money for them to fix later in terms of concessions, seller paid concessions, or if they just want to lower the price because of that, in that amount. If it doesn't matter to your client, then I would give multiple options to a seller and say, would your seller feel more comfortable for us dropping the price by this amount? Would your seller feel more comfortable doing the repairs themselves before our final walkthrough? Or what would they like how would they like to handle it? And kind of let them choose. When it comes to repairs, having the seller do the repairs, though, keep in mind and maybe talk to your clients about this. If your client, let's say, just to keep things simple, if your client does ask for them to replace all the doorknobs in the house, and the seller does that, what is the seller likely going to do? You get the cheapest one they can find, probably do it themselves, may not be professionally done. So like, unless you're specific about that request, some of those things that may some of those things may be better off getting concessions for and having your buyer take care of it so they can choose the kind of doorknobs they want. And it's not something that they don't like. So just keep that in mind.
I have a question. So I'm have a friend who is about to, I'm hoping I can list his $1.7 million house.
Nice, that'd be
soon.
awesome.
There are a bunch of repairs that need to be done.
Yeah.
So it's an old house, it's been remodeled, but there's a bunch of things like I noticed on the eaves, the paint is peeling off and just,
Yeah,
you know, he knows a bunch of things that need to be repaired.
sure.
But the market is somewhat neutral right now, but what about in luxury? I mean,
Yeah.
What kind of concessions do you offer?
Yeah, it's a great question. If he has the time and money for it and resources, I would say that if things are broken, and this is my general recommendation for anyone selling a home, if it's broken, fix it before we sell it, before we put it on the market.
Yeah.
If there's something obviously glaring like the paint peeling off, I would strongly recommend having them do that before you list it. It's so interesting because a staged home and a home that's like beautiful can sell for usually up close to 10% more. It's pretty significant and 73% faster than the average home. There's a bunch of them.
Well, she didn't know what the glasses last month.
Becca Summers, maybe?
Hey, that's
Yeah, I know she does. So, yeah, we stage all of our homes also, except we don't have our own in-house company. So we either, well, sort of we do. We have an in-house company that will do not a virtual staging, but we'll go through and take photos and videos of the home, and they'll send them a packet of what they recommend doing. Or we also partner with Aloe and Elm is a staging company locally that could go in and help them stage the home as well. Depends on how many rooms they do and how long the furniture is kept there, but somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 is what the cost is. But if your home is selling for even 5% more, even 1% more, 1% of 500,000 is $5,000. Like that more than covers the cost.
So I've
So-
heard in other classes, it's about 1,800 to stage a house.
Yeah.
But I mean, this house is 6,600.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot more.
So, I
And
mean,
because you
like-
can choose by room, you can say, I want to do 3 rooms, living room, bedroom, kitchen, whatever.
Yeah.
Or you could say, I want to stage the entire house. Like it just depends. There's a lot of variety when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So
but I mean, a house that big would cost
it would cost a lot more.
like 5,000 to stage maybe.
Could be, yeah,
Yeah.
could be even more.
Okay.
No,
Yeah. I know,
but
right?
they sell faster and they sell for more. So it's
Yeah.
like it generally covers itself. If a home already looks good, then obviously this may not be worth going in and replacing all the furniture and spending the money there. But if a home is vacant, I highly recommend getting it staged. They just sell faster. They
Is
sell.
that
for more.
something that I should offer? I'm going to stage your house for you.
Yes and no. Like
Okay.
that's one of the things that we as agents kind of just wing it a little bit. That's why for me, my preference is that's not my expertise. And so I partner with I say partner, but really we recommend working with them, right? Like maybe they've helped us on some of our events and pitched in, but like I'm not an actual partner or anything, but we've partnered with Aloe and Elm to have them come. And because they do a good job, like I trust that when they go to the house, I like how they are treated and stuff. So it kind of comes from us. But yeah, I let them do that. Right. And that's,
You let the client pay for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
it
So,
depends. And again, that's up to everybody. We cover half. That's what we do is we'll cover half of it. But we found that if we cover half and pay for it up front, and then the home doesn't sell or they decide not to sell, we still are stuck with the bill. So the way we've decided to do it is to cover half credited to you at closing. So that way we do cover half, but in the form of a reimbursement, basically. So anyway, cool. So we talked about repairs, keeping the list short, keeping what is really important to you. Is there anything on this list that would make you not feel comfortable purchasing this home? If so, okay, let's address those things. And I'd like to keep the list as short as possible while still accomplishing what my buyer wants. This is not a wish list of like, oh, it'd be perfect if your home had these other doors instead of those doors. Like, we're not asking for things that are not there. Like, you wouldn't ask for them to install a pool before you move in. Like, if the pool's not there, like, you're not asking for that. So it's not that. Sometimes people have that misconception that like, I want to ask for things that aren't there. That's not what this is. It's asking for repairs or things that would make you either lose value, that the home affects the home's value, or that you just don't feel safe in or comfortable moving in unless certain things were done a certain way. So, but you get that list, talk to the seller, send them. I usually like to send them an email as well of those specific items, kind of as a follow-up on the phone call. And then, or yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, the seller's agent, and talk to them of what those things are. And then, yeah, but the same is true with these other tips where the less information you give them, the better chance you have. So keep it short, keep that call. Hey, this is what we're requesting, instead of going into detail because, my buyer doesn't like it because of this, and I want this to be fixed. Yeah, there's a couple addenda. It can. This is the part where you want to check with your lender, though, if your client's getting a loan, because oftentimes the lenders don't want to see certain repairs on a home in a contract, because then also they may have to send an additional appraiser out that could take a lot more time to have them verify that those things are completed.
what types of repairs?
Pretty much a lot of repairs.
They don't want to see repairs
Right. They don't like to see repairs in the contract.
in
Right.
an addendum?
Right. There is a repair addendum, so you could use it, but I would just say talk to the lender and say, hey, would it be appropriate if we were to include this in the contract? a lot of times they'll say, no, we don't want to see that. And so what you'll do is get the sellers to confirm that they'll do that in writing in an email or something like that. And then do a final walkthrough. 100% of the time, do a final walkthrough. One of the things you're looking at or looking for is if you did request some repairs to be done during your final walkthrough, that's what you're looking for, just to make sure that those are done to their level of expectation.
So it's better to keep repairs in an email, not in an addendum.
Generally, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably more common practice than anything. But again, talk to the lender because I don't want to.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, but then if you go through the final walkthrough and things are not done to that standard, then you could delay closing and you have other options there. So, or maybe at that point the seller's like, yeah, we ran out of time, we couldn't do it. So fine, we'll give you some concessions instead. So you may renegotiate again at that point. That could happen. But okay, so there's that. We talked about repairs. On the seller side, again, same thing. When it said set expectations, let them know how many offers do you think ask for something? What percentage of offers? It's not everybody, but it is the majority, right? So let them know that the buyers are likely to go through after their home inspection and they're likely to ask for something. You're their guide, and so you let them know, like, I'll be your guide and to help you know, depending on the market, depending on the offers we received, what your negotiation position is, so that we can definitely help this thing move along as smoothly as possible. But just know that that may be coming up. So that way, when they do send a couple of things to get repaired, your sellers aren't hit with they're not blindsided by like, what? I thought this wouldn't happen. Like, this is probably going to happen. So they need to be expecting of that. And then when you do get that list, again, that client that I had that they sent in 30 items, instead of me telling them how I think, I just let them know, hey, these are the things they're asking for. And he went through the list and said, okay, I can do these things. And it was 15, more than I thought they would, but he was happy about it. Like, he wanted to move forward. So don't answer for your clients. And then I would even say, don't even tell them what you think unless they ask you about it. Or if you think they're just way off, and say, hey, I appreciate you being willing to do those 15 things, but based on our negotiating position, I think we could get away with just doing 3 or 4 of those. Would you feel comfortable with that? And kind of have that conversation. Okay, last thing, we got a couple minutes. The appraisals. So you guys heard of an appraisal gap? It's not very common anymore, at least not right now, but it still could be used as something to really make your offer stand out if your client is willing and able to do it. So you guys know how appraisals work. You've got, let's say you're under contract for a property for $500,000, and the appraiser comes in and says, we're valuing this property at $490,000. So there's a $10,000 appraisal gap. What are the 3 possible outcomes, or what are the 3 possible solutions for that scenario? Ask the seller to lower the price to $490,000, right? That could happen. Okay, what else?
The buyer to cover.
Yeah, ask the buyer to cover the difference, and what does that mean for them?
They
if-
have to bring cash.
They have to bring $10,000 in cash, meaning in cash in addition to their closing costs and in addition to their minimum down payment required.
Had to do that before.
Have you? Yeah. So just keep this in mind. If an offer in that scenario, let's say that there's an offer, somebody has a down payment of $100,000, but their loan program they're choosing to go with it requires to have 20% down. What is 20% of 500,000? 100,000. So that's their limit. That's all the money they have. They can't spend $1 more. Now let's say we have another buyer that's spending, I don't know, that has $30,000 as a down payment, significantly less, but their minimum down payment required is 3%. And 3% of 500,000 is 15,000. So that means they have a lot more wiggle room on appraisal because they're already planning on paying that money towards their down payment, and their minimum down payment required is much less. So just know that just because they have a higher down payment doesn't mean that they necessarily have a stronger offer, because if there's an appraisal gap, that $100,000 down payment, well, that's their limit. They have to have that money all going towards their minimum required, and so they can't use that for their appraisal gap.
In this market, the seller,
More than likely, yes. Yep. But we're still in the seller's market.
they are,
We're still definitely in the seller's market. We're at 3.5 months of inventory right now, which means usually a neutral market is 5 to 7 months.
Because
Mhm.
what I've been looking at is, I guess Utah County is like
Utah County.
2.5. The
Yeah.
last couple days, I've just been talking to Dean. Looking at his,
Yeah, and that may be true. It's depending, there's a lot of different like
Yeah,
ways to get that
yeah,
number. So
yeah.
maybe depending on what he's looking at. As far as statistics go, what I'd advise is keep looking at the same statistics every time, or the same method or the same company that you use to get your statistics, because that way you can at least see the trends of it, if it's going up or down. But if you compare this company's days on market to this one, they may include certain criteria that this one didn't. That's why their numbers may look different. But you're right. Could be that. I've heard of that. Yeah. Actually, if it's an FHA one, only if it's FHA, yes. So that means, yeah, if you get an appraisal that's an FHA appraisal and another FHA buyer comes, they have to go by that appraisal. But a conventional one, I think, is there's no time limit on that. It can be refreshed. But yeah, so we've talked about those two options. So the seller can lower their price, the buyer can come up with extra money, or there's a combination of the two. Meet in the middle somehow. Buyer comes up with an extra 5, seller comes down the next 5. Right. So those are the things. This could be figured out beforehand at the time of offer. If your buyer absolutely wants this place and they're willing to cover an appraisal gap of a certain amount, you can say that. Again, going back to a couple years ago, that was pretty common to see. Now it's not so common, but that is one of the things that you could do to make your offer stronger if your client is willing and able, is to potentially cover an appraisal gap. The challenge with that is that you don't know what the appraisal is going to be yet. So there could be no gap, which would be great, or there could be a gap larger than what they are comfortable with. So you've got to kind of figure that out, or put a cap on it, put a limit, something like that. But yeah, that's the other time when you are going to be negotiating. So at the time of offer, almost always at the time of due diligence, but not always. Sometimes buyers are good to just move forward as is, or sometimes the appraisal. And then you should be good. There's a higher percentage of the deal closing for each deadline you pass, obviously. But the highest, I would say it's probably 90 to 95% of the time it closes after the financing and appraisal deadline. Once you pass that, you're pretty good. So
How often do houses or do homes, or I guess deals, fall out of contract?
again, depend on the market. I would say right now, I do not know this statistic, so I'm just totally shooting from the hip. From my experience, I would say it's probably close to 10%. So it does happen,
Yeah.
but not very often. But it also depends on the seller's agent and how you can kind of control that. So if you get multiple offers, you can hopefully tighten up some of the deadlines, or make it so their earnest money becomes non-refundable within a week, something like that, so that you're more likely to move forward than that. Or you could do what that agent did and say earnest money is non-refundable in 2 hours. Do that. Don't recommend it. We don't need to do that right now in this market, but yeah, so they do happen. And that's also something good to let the sellers know, that although this is a great step moving forward, we got under contract, there is a chance that we can go under, that the buyer cancels. And I always let them know when their earnest money becomes non-refundable. Usually that's the financing and appraisal deadline. So if that's 3 weeks away, and that's what I tell the sellers, is they potentially could cancel up to 3 weeks from now and still get their money back, and you have to find another buyer. So some sellers may want to find a backup offer, so that immediately if that buyer cancels, you've got this offer already in place. That's an approach that some agents take. A lot of times you don't necessarily want to do that. Just depends on what that backup offer looks like. If it's really similar to that first one, I'd probably say go ahead with the backup offer. But the risk is if that deal falls through, and then another offer could come along that's better, but you've got this backup offer already accepted, you can't get out of that. So you may not want to have an official backup offer, but maybe just say, hey, you're the first person I'll call if this deal falls through, and then get it in writing at that point. So there's pros and cons. But okay, has this been helpful?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What is one more? Let's get 1 or 2 more ahas, and then we'll wrap up. It's a process. Yeah. Takes practice, takes experience, just like anything. But again, you guys are already ahead of the game, I would say, by knowing a couple of those things, which is to listen, keep information that could hurt you close to your chest, ask questions, Call the listing agent as soon as you have an offer. Set clear expectations for your client on home inspections, what the purpose of that is. Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
I think it's helpful to talk to, I guess, different people who are teaching these classes and
Yeah.
get their perspectives. You know, I mean, everybody's told me a little bit different perspective on staging.
Mm.
So I'm like, I'm learning that I can
You
can
can do how
create
you-
my
yeah,
own
how
way
you
of
feel
doing
comfortable.
things. I don't have to follow any one way.
Exactly. And again, there are certain things, like if you guys have read the Red Book, the Millionaire Real Estate Agent, very good at teaching. There are models that are successful, that are proven. Do the models. Yeah, MREA.
MREA.
Yeah. The number one book I'd recommend any agent. Yeah. Yeah, just at the front desk. Yeah, it's number one book I'd recommend any agent reading.
Can I get it on Audible?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere. But in there, it talks about following the model. And then after you've implemented the model, meaning what works for other agents that have proven to be successful, if you do exactly what they do, there's no reason you won't be successful, right? So follow the model. And then, yes, it's okay to put your spin on certain things, but only after. What a lot of us do is like, I'm going to create the model myself. I want to put my own spin on it first. Then that's fine. You'll figure it out. But how long will it take you to figure that out versus doing what already works and then just tweaking it as you go?
Well,
So.
I mean, everybody stages.
Yeah.
That I've talked to, but some people say, well, I stage these rooms, or, you know, I
Sure.
stage it myself, or, you know,
Mhm.
different things like that.
Yeah. And part of that's just your own preference on, like, I know Becca, like she has an eye for the interior design and she wants to do that as part of her business. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's different ways to go about it, but it's a good point. And that, again, that's why I like the Ignite classes and how it's set up, is because, yeah, you get to hear different perspectives and you kind of go with what you resonate the most with.
Yeah.
On some of those things. And then other things are the model where you really should all just do this. But
Yeah, for sure.
cool. Well, thank you guys for coming. Again, feel free to reach out if you ever have questions or if you need a second opinion on anything. I'm always happy to help when I can. So
Thank you so much. Always great class. Appreciate you.
awesome. Thanks, Mel.